What we're going to do today then, first of all, Clara, who it suddenly occurs to me that I haven't introduced. Should I introduce you formally? Well, okay, Clara Chuan, Chuan is our very own assistant professor in the Department of Translation, Interpreting and Intercultural Studies. I'm sure that she won't mind my saying that she was once upon a time our PhD student, and I should probably declare an interest that she's actually my PhD student. So it's very interesting seeing her work, have developed from that PhD to this book, and some people sort of just bring their PhD straight to market and it's basically the same. But in Chuan's case, she has really done quite a lot of revision. So although there are, bits that are, noticeably ring lots of bells and bring back some nostalgic discussions from those years ago, there's a lot of new stuff in there as well. So it's very exciting to see how her work has moved on. So we're going to be, first of all, Chuan's going to give a presentation. And she says it's about half an hour, is that right? Yeah, okay. And she'll probably try to answer every question that we might ask in that time, but hopefully we'll still have some to ask afterwards. So we will have then a kind of Q&A with the three of us discussants. But also do feel free to come in either online if you want to post questions, or, we're in this very cozy interactive room. So do, feel free to ask questions as well. And I'll try to sort of, break it up and open it to the floor every so often. Okay, so I think without further ado, Chuan, would you like to come and present? Okay, good. Let's give her a big welcome. Thanks.
I'm a bit nervous. So good evening, everyone, or good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thanks so much for your very kind introduction, Robert. And to be honest, this is my first face-to-face research seminar in 3 years since the pandemic. So hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to this book talk on the topic of collaborative translation. In fact, I would like to take this book talk as an opportunity to reflect on collaborative translation's past and present as a practice, as well as existing scholarship discussing this topic. But more importantly, I really look forward to the discussing later on to have a look at how the practice would have been devolving in these few years, and also how collaborative translation scholarship will continue to develop and thrive. So let's have a look at the book. The book, as you can see from, as the title of the book suggests, it tackles the practices of collaborative translation, the development identities of online translation communities, and also the identities of the social actors engaging in this practice. I would really like to mention that this study focuses on the actual processes of collaborative translation. It means that I used this research methodology of digital ethnography to be part of the community members and to see how they actually interact with each other, translate with each other as the practice takes place and unfolds in its authentic setting. In the presentation, I will not introduce the research methodology very much. I'll try to squeeze everything in half an hour. But I will be very happy to talk about research methodology if you have any questions. As the subtitle of the book suggests, there are 3 dimensions that this book examines: community, practice, and identity. If we look at the 8 chapters, in fact, I proposed 9 to the publisher, but one of the reviewers suggested to me to incorporate the last chapter throughout the other 8. That is to say, it seems that certain chapters give more weight to one of the dimensions. So for example, chapter 3, I engage in a critical reflections and discussion on this concept of communities, online communities and communities of practice. Whereas in later chapters, it looks like it focuses on practice more. However, I'd like to emphasize that, which is also what I argue in the book, in order to achieve an in-depth examination of online collaborative translation, and also to do in considerable detail, it is necessary to regard all 3 aspects as a unit whole. It's exactly the overarching research theoretical framework of communities of practice that lends us the tool to do that at a practical, theoretical, as well as the analytical level. And I will introduce this theory, or COP in abbreviation, in the presentation too. To turn pages, nope, okay. Okay, it's not turning pages. Let me see if it turns. Yeah, okay. This is a popular image. It's probably familiar to translation people. Who is this? Can you? Yes, Saint Jerome. And this is a popular image of Saint Jerome working on his own, translating the sacred texts of Bible from Greek into Latin in his cell. This image, to a great extent, projects this perceived view of translation or the translator as a someone who toils away and working on his or her own. So we have this perceived conception of translation as an alone affair, and rarely relates translation as a collaborative act. Whereas this is something that Robert must be very familiar with, maybe Catherine as well in the audience. In the Chinese history, in fact, from over 2,000 years ago, like the Buddhist translation projects have always been a collaborative act. This is also what James St. Andre argues in his works. But to a great extent, in the book and in my work, I argue that translation is always a collaborative undertaking, be it online or offline, be it literary, non-literary, pre-internet era, or offline, or in the current internet era. And I'll explain why. So obviously the book, it has 8 chapters and there is a lot to unpack. So I will try to pick some of the interesting issues, some of the findings, and the major contributions that I see fit in this talk introduction. One of the things that I'm really proud of is this map, which looks rather complex, is included in my chapter 1. And Robert saw an earlier version of this in my thesis, but this is a developed version. So in chapter 1, I try to charter and to conceptualize this overall collaborative translation space with reference to both China and collaborative translation overall. And the first categorization of collaborative translation is machine-centered collaborative translation versus human-centered collaborative translation. What differentiates those two is who has agency, or who has more agency in the production process. And this categorization is categorized by the generation of text. In the book, in my study, I have been focusing on human-centered collaborative translation, which has 2 more subcategories. One is what I refer to as single translator collaborative translation. that's also when I was preparing for this talk, I was pondering that's probably also why we have always seen translation as an alone work, because, for example, in this type of collaborative translation, there is only one person, one agent who actually engages in the linguistic transferring, but it doesn't suggest that translation is not a collaborative endeavor. And under this category, there are 3 more subtypes. I'll just give some examples. So for example, in literary worlds, the translator actually often collaborates with editors, revisers, or the book publishers. And also in translating literature, translator often works with the author. So for example, Howard Goldblatt, I trust many of you have heard of him. He's a well-known translator translating Mo Yan's fictions and novels into English. And Mo Yan is a Nobel Literature laureate. And when Howard Goldblatt was translating Mo Yan's works, they had been collaborating and interacting with each other frequently. And over here, there is a very interesting case that is translator collaborating with what I call a collaborator. And over here, it's the special, in the special sense, in an example of Lin Shu. So many of us know about Lin Shu, who is a man of letters and a translator in the late Qing dynasty, and in the late Qing and early Republican period in China. It's interesting that Lin Shu actually had no foreign language at all, yet he translated over 180 European literature into Chinese, and these over 180 literature were originally written in different European languages. Then he's achieved that by working with his collaborator, who played the role of an oral interpreter, and then they told Lin Shu about what's been talking about in the literature, and then Lin Shu put them in writing in Chinese. The other category is multiple translators collaborative translation. I'll just give one example of multiple translators working with the author, and this happened to another Nobel Literature laureate, Ganton Grass. Have you read his? Yeah, and it's just so fascinating that he insisted his translators had to have conversations and attend his seminars, so that he could help them to understand the difficulties and challenges in the text that he deemed as the challenges in the text. And these were all written in the terms and conditions in the translator's contracts. And finally, of course, what this book we finally got here is online collaborative translation. That is what my work has been focusing on, what this book is about. So what makes online collaborative translation stand out in this rather complex collaborative translation landscape is that, first of all, in all these forms of collaborative translation, the translator is working on one particular language and also have their own translated text to work on. So they collaborate with others, but they have their own target language and the target text. Whereas in online collaborative translation, which I will explain later on, it's multiple translators working together to produce the same translated material, be it textual or audio visual. And the other thing that is of finding in the book that also differentiates online collaborative translation from other types of multiple translator collaborative translation lies with the translation process that I details in chapter 5. So you remember all these types, right? And in terms of translation process, it follows what I refer to as a waterfall collaborative translation process, which is also known as a TEP process. This is a long-standing form of collaborative translation and translation overall. And in this type of translation, all participants play a specific role, and there is a hierarchical divisions amongst them according to their varying degrees of expertise and competence. And also every participant has to wait the previous stage to finish so that they can start the next. However, in online collaborative translation, I Well, this is something else. I refer to this cyclical collaborative translation process as a hybrid linear cyclical online collaborative translation. It means that OCT involves a cyclical procedure. It's embedded within a linear translation and publication process. That is to say, while we translate and publish linearly on the whole, the activities like translating, revising, editing, proofreading, and later re-revising, re-editing, and publishing, they take place cyclically. And also in this, what I call an open and semi-open communities, it provides this environment to for this kind of cyclical transition process as a never ending process. So this cyclical process may never end. So for example, on Yiyan, when a commenter points out something, and then the translators may go back to the translation or the text and continue to revise it. And this is especially typical in Wikipedia, which is the multilingual encyclopedia, and you can keep translating and keep revising, keep republishing. This is an example from one of the collaborative translation projects that I engaged in this community called Yiyan. It's also one of the main cases in my study. It's the biggest online collaborative translation community on the Chinese internet. And in this particular project, there are 4 participants, and one of them is myself. That's why it's ethnography. All 4 participants played the roles of translator, proofreader, reviser, editor, and publisher. And this task was divided into 4 segments. And these tasks, translation, revision, editing, they took place in parallel and in rotation. So all 4 people working simultaneously and also sequentially in order to finish this task. Also because of this open and semi-open, this nature of the open and semi-open nature of online communities, that's also allowed and the environment of as many participants as possible to engage in this activity. So I remember during my fieldwork, one of the collaborative projects that I participated had up to over 30 translators, excluding commenters on this online community. At the same time, this kind of open, semi-open communities also created an environment for dynamic negotiations between those participants at different stages, because after all, they still have the stages of translation, revising, editing, proofreading, and finally publishing. So that leads us to share with you some of the theoretical findings and contributions from this book. As I mentioned, I use the theory of communities of practice, which is a social learning theory that examines human experience as mini negotiation. Essentially, I regard collaborative translation as a mini negotiation experience. And it also locates identity constitution in a social world. So what is a COP, or what are COPs? According to Attila Wenger, who is the founder of this theory, COPs are groups of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. So that sounds familiar and in line with the practice of collaborative translation. So in the book, I regard online collaborative translation as a dynamic social activity in which translators regularly interact with each other. They would have to in order to produce the text. And also through which they negotiate meanings in the process of translating and collaborating. Originally, in Wenger's this COP theory, practices at the core of a COP theory, and there are 3 dimensions. These are the original 3 dimensions that he envisioned. One of them is mutual engagement, referring to meaning participating in shared activities together, and in this case, collaborative translation. And there is another dimension that is shared repertoire, referring to a set of resources that participants use to negotiate. And shared repertoire can be really heterogeneous. It can be simply be who they are, their disciplinary and occupational expertise, or since this happens on the internet, it can be ICT technologies, the information and communication technologies, or it can as simple as their profile pic. Sometimes you can really tell some of their personalities and how that relates, for example, gender issues as one of their repertoire. And another dimension is that of joint enterprise, referring to the collectively negotiated purpose or goal of a community practice. So, for example, motivations and also what do they intend to achieve by forming into this social aggregation. Well, of course, it's a study, right? And one of the contributions in the book is that because collaborative translation is inherently interactive. So in my study, mutual engagement, or this practice of collaborative translation, it occupies a central position. I give it, so I use practice and mutual engagement interchangeably in my COP theoretical framework. Instead, I added another dimension that is mutual recognition. If you remember, I said collaborative translation is an experience of mini negotiation. So at each stage and for every decisions that they make, there is often contestations, negotiations, or even arguments. So sometimes online, there are very heated arguments behind the scene as well as on the website. And together with shared repertoire and joint enterprise, they all together would form into what we call regimes of competence of that COP. Other theoretical developments in the book is to test the COP, how stretchable and its potential to be used in combination with other theories. So for example, in chapter 4, where I frame online collaborative translation as a citizen media practice, I combined COP theory with Mona Baker and Chuan Harding's versions of social narrative theory, which I will show you an example later on, an online translation community which started as a citizen journalism project. And in this sense, it can be regarded as a citizen media practice and can be analyzed as both a narrative theory and both a narrative community and a community of practice. If we have a look at chapter 7, online collaborative translation is analyzed as a shared history of learning by using COP theory with another dimension of COP, that is situated learning. In which Wenger is also one of the developers with Jean Lave. In this chapter, I discuss collaborative translation's potential in translator education and how that classroom translator education can be also deployed, or how online collaborative translation can also be utilized in training translators. Then finally, which I myself find interesting and also I get inspired from Robert's work, is to engage online collaborative translation with the literature in non-professional translation and interpreting. All those people work translating and on the internet are volunteers. And in translation studies literature, they are often referred to as non-professional translators, which is another term, another line of thoughts in our scholarly discussion. However, sometimes we ponder the question, are they really non-professionals, right? And is their translation unprofessionally produced? By contest this concept of professionalism, I bring in the concepts of knowledge or definition of knowledge and knowledge management and knowledge exchange from organization studies. By analyzing 2 cases of medical transition projects between, I think, about 8-7 translators plus a few other commenters to analyze the revision histories, their conversations, as well as the heated debates. Who has this shared repertoire? Who has this competence to actually translate medical knowledge and to reproduce knowledge on the internet? So these were some of the details, but as I said, I will use citizen media transition practice as an example, right? By talking about that, we're talking about transition online and on the Chinese internet. So if we now zoom out to have a look at the social, cultural, political internet ecology, that is chapter 2. And also we have our expert, Dr. Dingkun Wang here, who exactly studies this media, digital media world. So this kind of online collaborative translation is regarded as a form of daily activities on the Chinese internet. And the emergence of online translation, especially fan subbing, fan translation, and other forms of audiovisual translation, are underpinned by what we refer to as participatory culture. This means that, and also media convergence, who empower the traditionally positioned spectators of media users to proactively engage in civic lives, express themselves, create new knowledge, and also circulate alternative realities through their collaborative and the collective production of media content. Actually here I quoted Ding Kun a lot, as he's very prolific in this field of research. So also another feature of this book is how I draw a parallel between the development of online collaborative translation in China on the Chinese internet with the development of the Chinese internet in the past 15 years. Obviously, the regulations, the ecologies of Chinese internet also evolve and develop, and the practices, the communities, they adapt to that online ecology. It's very interesting that whereas we have actually a huge body of scholars studying the Chinese internet, there is actually there used to be an annual Chinese internet conference. There is this scholarship, and they study all sorts of online activities like e-commerce, entertainment, online gaming, use of ICTs, and crowdsourcing. But online translation is rarely mentioned. However, in translation studies, we have started to look at this phenomenon. So according to Harold and the SETA in their meta review of the Chinese internet research, they revealed that each author in this Chinese internet research scholarship, this literature, each author applies his or her own disciplinary approach to the research and targets his or her own publication at ongoing discourses within the field. And it's also interesting that within this field, a lot of the scholars are with the background of communication and media studies, political science, sociology, in business, and there is a tiny portion of scholars from humanities and arts and from a language background. And the other thing that their study revealed is there is also very little study that examines how individual users of a particular online platform give meaning to the platform, to the services, and to their daily activities. So online collaborative translation, as I mentioned, is regarded as a day-to-day activity to which participants give meaning in this book. So if we're talking about Chinese internet, these are two of the quotes that I really like or enjoy. One is that there are 4 major attempts that's made to theorize the Chinese internet. What I draw on in my study is from David Harold. He's a German anthropologist and UK trained. He sees the Chinese internet as an online carnival. What is a carnival? According to Bakhtin, it's a pageant without footlights and without a division into performers and spectators. In a carnival, in this case, the Chinese internet, everyone is an active participant. And also in this carnival, its participants live in it. So these daily activities of translating, commenting, selecting, reading translated activities is like every translator or participants living in this world. Another one is that Michelle Hawkes, who specializes in studying online literature in China, he sees the Chinese internet as a mixed, messy space where the socialist publishing system has been left far behind, but residual socialism lingers through novel regulation systems. He also sees that the Chinese internet, this messy, mixed space, because as I said, the ecology of Chinese internet develops, right? And we can see the publication year. He published that in 2015, so the research might have been done in 2012 or 2013. So during that time, according to his finding, there was plenty of room for independent expression and creativity, and also where there were new novel forms and of communication and interactions. And that leads to one of the cases in the book, which is a citizen journalism project. So as I mentioned in chapter 4, I theorized online collaborative translation in its early stages, which were in early 2000s, as a citizen media practice. And this is one of the earlier online translation communities. It was a Chinese language news website providing translated articles from all around the world. And their slogan was report another dimension of the world. They focuses on marginalized topics such as LGBT community, homeless people, and what makes really interesting was that they were founded by a group of students from Beijing Foreign Studies University. So taking advantage of their multilingualism, they translated foreign media from over 30 languages into Chinese in order to provide another dimension or alternative realities of the media content to the Chinese audience, with the focus on marginalized topics. So the commonly used languages that they worked on include like English, French, German, Spanish, Japanese, but also they tried to be as inclusive as possible. So they also translated from media content written in smaller languages or less widely used languages like Albanian, Polish, Serbian, so on and so forth. They lasted for about 4 years between 2011 and 2014. So theoretically speaking, in chapter 4, I frame online collaborative translation as a form of citizen media practice. In this practice, so when our OCT is in this form as a practice, it is in which and through which those citizen translators, so they're ordinary citizens, unaffiliated individuals, make an ethical choice of making certain knowledge available to readers who have limited access to that knowledge. And citizen translators translate and comment on texts and utterances that participate in creating, negotiating, and contesting social realities. In this chapter, I frame translation or collaborative translation quite loosely, broadly. So translators are both those people who engage in text selection and translation, as well as the participants who are the citizen media community members commenting and circulating the newly produced media content through translation. Okay, I think, so we talk about identities as well, right? So this is just to give you some of the examples of the people that I worked with in field work. As we can see that they are not non-professionals, they are professionals. We even have UN translators translating as a volunteer. We also have researchers in immunology who thought I was not capable of translating that piece of text. We also had students in physics, curators and officers working in museums, even graduate students in other science subjects. So I will not talk about this in detail, but as I mentioned, these people are actually professionals. They're not non-professionals. And in translation studies scholarship, when we approach them from our translations discourse, we usually regard them as untrained, no credentials, right? And also because their work is not has no remuneration, that's why they're often treated as non-professionals. And the adjectives we use to refer to non-professional translation are not always that positive, such as ad hoc, fluid, unrecognized, and unnoticed. So in this chapter, as I mentioned, I contested this concept of professionalism by engaging in the to see how the knowledge is exchanged and how the translators' non-professional identities are intertwined with their knowledge exchange. I will skip the details, but I'll jump to the findings in this chapter, which are in a non-professional online collaborative translation setting. Both expert and non-expert translators with varying levels of expertise in translation and subject matter, they do care about the quality of the translated products. Hence, the practice is more concerned with whether the final translation is professionally produced, gate kept by who they are, and what knowledge they can contribute to the actual processes of translating and collaborating. And which is an experience of knowledge exchange. So in this chapter, online collaborative translation is regarded as a knowledge exchange experience. So that's to say, being a volunteer or being a non-professional, quote, quote, non-professional translator or translating without remunerations by no means indicates that social agents involved in this practice are not professionally undertaken. So I said we will get back to this map. In the conclusion, we had a look at online collaborative translation as a form of human-centered collaborative translation. And I refer to this group of translation as first generation online collaborative translation. However, with the development of technologies, there has been more and more integration of technologies into collaborative translation as well. So, which I think we probably will include in our discussion is the development and the trend of human machine interactions when it comes to the future generation of collaborative translation. So to wrap up, as Neither has argued back in 2019, collaborative translation is likely to occupy an increasingly important position in translation studies. In some sense, all translation is collaborative. The ever-changing forms of translation in collaboration drive us to revisit what we mean by translation as both a product and a process. And Miguel has already answered this question in his book, how collaborative translation or online collaborative translation has expanded and will continue to expand the limits of translation studies. That's all of my presentation, and thank you very much.
Going to move around a little bit. Yeah, that's right. Good, thank you very much. So I think what we'll do now then is to have a certain amount of discussion between us. So the three of us can perhaps each pose a question to Clara. Yeah, or alternatively to pick up however you like, whether you want to make a prepared comment or you want to just come back on with a question or whatever, and then let's see how it goes, and then I think open it up a little bit to the floor, and we'll take it fairly fluidly. Maybe I can ask you one first, just to start off. There were a number of things I wanted to ask you actually, but perhaps just to start with the more general one. You talked about the methodology, and you said that you deliberately were not going to say much in your presentation. So I was wondering if you could sort of walk us through some of the methodology of this, and particularly how you got into that community, how you engaged with them, what were the challenges, what were the sort of perhaps the ethical issues of it. That might be quite a tech issue here. Hang on. Is it okay? Right. Okay. We're back in action again. So Chuan, can you first perhaps speak to that a little bit? Yeah.
Thanks, Robert, for asking that question. As some of you here know me, I'm a passionate ethnographer. It's at the core of my research for this book and also for my new projects. So as not when I was preparing for this part of research, these projects, I used digital ethnography, so which is a particular form of ethnography, and it began with so initially I was actually looking for data for what I proposed for my original PhD project, which was about the translational political journalism articles, whereas I couldn't find enough data. And to my surprise, I found EN and many other online translation communities. Thus, I started to, of course, with discussions with Roberts, we started to decide to look at actual processes of translation, and that required a very different methodological angle. I think so at the beginning, so long story short, then we decided to use ethnography, and which began with very broad observation with no interactions with the community members at all. That is one of the challenges that many ethnographers would encounter, which was entering the field sites as an outsider. So you are not one of the community members. You don't want to scare them away. Otherwise, you would lose the entire research context, right? And then you have no project to do. So it took me about 4 months, pure observation in the main case, EN, to observe just what they are, what they do, how they do the things. And during this process, I wrote down field notes. It took me that long to summon up the courage to actually start to talk to some of the community members. And then gradually, of course, because this main case, it's a vast community. It has over 500,000 volunteer translators who have accumulatively translated over 500,000 materials. And it has different sub-communities. So I also needed to make a decision as to which aspect of this online translation community that I would like to examine. Then that moved on to more focused observation with certain sub-communities, and also with what we would call in ethnography focused participation or moderate participation, And then gradually you became more active, and then that became active participation. So during this process, the ethics, which I write in one of my publications, in fact, it's called The Confession of a Digital Ethnographer's Journey in Translation Studies, to examine this dilemma, the ethical dilemma of being an outsider and the insider, and the researcher playing different roles and having multiple identities as a translator, researcher, a community member, and how we lose our sense of identity and encounter this identity crisis. So that's a very broad, general answer to that.
And just to sort of very briefly follow up, when you did reveal yourself to those who otherwise thought you were an innocent translator, what was the response?
That's an excellent question, because that's exactly what I argue in my article, is how the situational nature of ethnography. You need to, so different community members responded to that differently. One of the earlier participants I got in touch with, his attitudes toward me completely changed after I revealed my identity. I all of a sudden I had this capital, or the expertise, shared repertoire of being an expert in language brought into the team that he summoned up for collaborative translation, whereas some other members were just took it as it, and didn't really felt being such an intrusive act. So it really depends on who they are.
And then you just have to smooth it over.
Yeah, just play along.
All right, thanks. I'm going to bring in Miguel there. Would you like to come in with really anything you want to observe or ask?
Yeah, can you hear me?
You'll need to...
I'm muted. I can hear myself.
Another tech issue.
I can keep talking.
Wait, hang on.
Yes.
Hang on, we can't hear you, Miguel. Hang on a minute.
1 second. Maybe now. No. Maybe now.
I can hear you just fine.
Can you hear me?
I don't know why the others are having trouble.
Maybe it's in the room, the audio to the room.
Miguel, can you try again now?
Yes, I can definitely talk.
Great, thank you very much. That was
Oh, it works?
very, very basic technological problem, which
It's okay.
has been overcome. Great, thanks.
The hybrid nature of these events around the world now, we're moving from the Zoom to the hybrid, and it has all these technological issues. So first of all I want to congratulate Clara in this massive accomplishment of publishing her book. I think we've been talking about the topic and her book for a little bit, and I've been really proud, and I've been really honored to have some discussions with her also throughout the process. And she ended her presentation with one quote, I think from my book, in how it expands, collaborative translation expands translation studies. And in the book, we find also a great, massive contribution to the body of knowledge of translation studies about how collaborative translation on the studies on this area can expand. And I want to thank Clara for sharing her research with us. I like also that she centers, I went through the whole book again last week, and she centers her work on the humans, on the participants. And in an age of which all the talks is going towards ChatGPT and artificial intelligence. She just mentioned that there are like 500,000 participants. It's like we have like one model, one system creating text, and all the talk in the media is going there. And we have to always bring back the conversation to the translations to the participants and to her work. And I do have lots of questions that I would like, or comments for her, but I want to bring it to, I enjoyed the epistemological or conceptual work that she did in the book a lot, the theoretical, obviously, also. And she discusses the blurring of the professional and non-professional. And I know that the first studies on TED Talks found that there are professionals we cannot really discuss like that they're non-professionals. And she discusses notions as expertise, regime of competence, etc. And I also, she just mentioned in the presentation, the translation senator, the position, and I love that terminology, like that they use at EM, being a senator. And I wanted to ask her how she perceives moving forward the discipline, and whether her contribution can help clarify this point very clearly, in sense that volunteer translation, for example, collaboration doesn't necessarily entail professionalism in this case. And I also really enjoyed your work on the hierarchical structures, describing the community of practice from how people get in and how they gain recognition, the regimes of competence, etc. So I wanted to ask you about the role of performance in creating these levels of hierarchical levels, and how you see the discipline moving forward in terms of like the discussion on professional, the blurring of professional and non-professional in this area.
Great, thank you very much. Clara, do you want to take that?
Oh, thank you so much for your very kind comments, Miguel. And likewise, I enjoy reading your book, which is the very first book-length discussion on online collaborative translation. That was a huge inspiration for my research. Well, the first question, well, that's a big question, how the development of the discipline. What I really find fascinating and interesting about online collaborative translation is indeed this concept of professionalism with the development, because there is an increasing interest and participation from the digital natives actually participating and translating online content. Professionally trained translators simply cannot cope with that great deal of materials to start with. And the other thing is because of the technological development, the boundary between quote, what we call professional translation and non-professional translation, because more and more lay people outside of the translation field will start to use technologies, whether it's machine translation or other form of translation technologies. Well, this will just become more and more prominent. So I think the boundary will be blurred to a greater extent in the near future. And that reminds me, in fact, of Lynn Bowker's work on the translation and machine translation literacy outside of the translation studies community. And online collaborative translation, whether it's in the form of human-to-human interaction or in the form of human-to-machine interaction. I think it will continue to, like, looking at translation, this is also related to ontology. So the being, right, being a translator, it's being one of us, being a collaborator in this collectivity. So we need to realize that this boundary is going to be broken down more and more in the future. And this perspective of looking at translation as an inherently collaborative undertaking is going to help us to reflect on what we mean by professionalism.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We'll come in again on some of those. I want to bring in Ding Kun now, so to have a chance to give your reflections.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for offering this great opportunity. Actually, this is my first time after all the 3 years actually made it to the event in person. Okay, well, thank you very much. And once again, congratulations to Clara on this wonderful book. Actually, I also finished reading the book last week, and Clara kindly invited me to reflect about her research and the field of interest of my own, which is fan translation and translational fandom. I'm sorry about that, if any neologism coming up. But in terms of fan translation, I think also partially discussed in Clara's book, the debate or discussion has always been revolving or focusing on the availability and the sort of the policymaking or censorship, or in some way it involves the so-called digital innovation, because the technology makes this distant online participation and collaboration possible and more efficient for either the user-driven or industry-driven translation projects. But on the other hand, people also raise this concern about exploitation of free digital labor, which is also so insightfully discussed in Clara's work. And in addition, there is debate also sort of between this for the participant or the community members. So how are we going to further evaluate their work or their identity or self-identification as a user turned translator or as a part of a larger community? So are they sort of emotionally attached, or is there any other ways to justify or critically review the ethical aspect of their practice? So this is the last point I really want to learn more from you, Clara. It's about, because this is actually being raised again more often in recent publication or upcoming publication. It's about the ethics and ethical aspect of online collaborative translation, including fan translation.
Thanks so much for your insights, Ding-Kun. Indeed, ethics, right? I think one of the most updated literature on online collaborative translation is Cornelia. Yeah, her work on the ethics of online translation and the exploitation of the free labor. We're aware that initially, like especially in the early stages of the development of online translations, we like Julie McDonough-Domaya, she categorized the practice as a for-profit and a not for-profit, and cost-driven and profit-driven. That has a clear-cut division as to which one is more ethical, which one is less ethical. However, this is also what Miguel wrote about in your recent publications regarding the use of machine translation in combination with community translation on for-profit communities or /platforms such as Facebook and Twitter. So these are the two examples in which the free labor is being exploited. Honestly, I don't have a definite answer to that, but as Ding-Kun mentioned, this is one of the newest developments in online collaborative translation. And in fact, we have a PhD student in our department who is exactly looking at the ethics of online collaborative translation in Wikipedia in producing knowledge about China as well. So I would really keep an eye on this strand of research in this area.
Miguel, Ding-Kun, do you want to come back on any of that at all?
Well, in terms of the ethical, I think that, and I think I discussed with Clara recently, we discussed about the boundaries, and like when there's this massive participation or interest or desire to translate, like Gambier called it desire to translate, and he discussed in another publication the the boundary between the non-appealing bits, like those areas that nobody wants to translate, and these topics in which, like, if in the YIYAM, if we have this massive community, there is a massive yearning for translation, and then I think the ethical boundaries are go more towards the for-profit ones, and normally we tend to generalize, and I think that Clara does a very good her work really clearly separates all this granularity between the more like professional, non-professional, how in your specific area there is a massive interest in participating. There's a massive interest to learn, and I've always had questions about this since like the 2014-13 when I was started working on my book, and professionals and other were, why are you researching this topic? I was always even questions at the beginning, like, why would I do the free thing? But I do believe that also I have comments about the terminology. I do like that Clara's, in your book, Clara, it's kind of very clear. There are other concepts kind of come out lately, like translaboration, in which we put labor, and I think we discussed this. Is labor when we enjoy doing something? It's a hobby. We can be builders, we can be mechanics, we can be any profession, and in our free time. And YIYAM is a clear example of that yearning. It could be for self-enjoyment, it could be for learning, and I have questions about learning for later too, about the situated learning. In your book, we have concurrent translation, but I think you have done a great work to try to separate, because at the beginning of a phenomenon, everything is more lumped together, and as you said, the expansion of translation studies, your work separates more, and we can have ethical discussions. So there's a lot of, in conferences, a lot of like sometimes outrage about the Uberization. That was Kokam Pirat that brought the Uberization of translation. We Uberize being used, and there are areas in which the user companies are, and there are others in which they're not. And I think having granularity and expanding the concepts and having in-depth work like the one you did helps expand on this discussion on ethical areas in which we can clearly separate and delineate everything rather than lump everything under one thing. I don't know what you think, Clara, about how you separate, areas for the more ethical, less ethical. Of course, I mean, the one YIYAM can have other ethical issues related to content, etc. But you can comment. I would like for you to comment on like the granularity that you bring to this debate of ethical issues.
Thanks, Miguel. Well, I think it's going to be more and more difficult to separate these different categories and different sub areas of online collaborative translation. First of all, there has been more and more integration or merging of having being on one platform that comprises of both the for-profit and the non-for-profit elements or different sub-communities. So for example, Ian, it's in fact a for-profit company which has two parts. It does have commercial translations as well. Yet the profits made from the commercial translation is used to compensate the running and the operation of these volunteer translation communities. So that is one thing. But if we really want to separate this, I think one thing that we could do is to separate, again, back to that map, the machine-centered collaborative translation. The ethics involved in using free data generated by human translators, but being exploited by the platforms that heavily rely on machines, AI-driven machine translation engines. For example, Twitter is one and Facebook is another again, and many others these days. I think WeChat does it as well. So, and that relates to another topic in online collaborative translation is translation and the social media and the translation of the platform, the issue of platformization as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dinkun, did you want to add anything?
Actually, just following up what Clara has just mentioned, this unstoppable and irreversible trend of platformization. Actually, there are some other terms coming up, like nowadays people are discussing the blockchain and the coming Web3 environment, which gonna change the whole game. But that happened yet. But something that does happen and is still happening is the platformization. Since these media and entertainment platforms trying to formalize or trying to bring in this fan-based talents of translation and other media literacy into their process of production and localization, it seems the autonomous space that for fans to operate on their own is shrinking. And they definitely sort of, on the one hand, they are losing their own territory, but on the other hand, because the industry more and more recognize their value and talents, their potential contribution and capability for value co-creation. So they definitely have a greater chance to formalize their practice. But this also brings a very challenging ethical issue about monetarization. It's not only about how fans transform their previous volunteer or altruive practice into a commercial entity, but it's about they actually become part of the expanding transmedia IP. Yeah, so just maybe this is also a area maybe for us to look into in the future.
Right, thanks. Clara, do you want to respond, or you just take that as, yeah. Okay, I'm aware a little bit of the time. Maybe we can, sorry? It's okay. Okay, we can go on all night. Great. So maybe I can just come in with another question, and that was to do with the narrative community that you mentioned about, because when I read chapter 4, you know, parts of it seemed familiar, but then I realized, well, actually, since your PhD, you had introduced narrative theory, Mona Baker's social narrative theory, and you know, that was quite exciting to read this update, and so I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about narrative community. I was thinking about it. You know, your example is this community talking about democracy, talking about a particular translation of I think it was an Economist article on democracy, and you said that, I think, if I'm understanding it right, that formed a narrative community because although there were different narratives of democracy, they were all sort of coalescing around that. So I mean, when we talk about those narrative communities in this context, are we talking about just these very sort of micro clusters that are subject matter related? And if so, is EEN a massive cot with sub communities who then have these, in turn, these disparate narrative communities, and in fact, each job is a narrative community? That's one question. And indeed, what is a narrative community? I mean, if you have a group of people talking about the subject, is that a narrative community? And the other thing I thought about was, you know, could EN, if you shift away from the subject focus and you go towards what EN is all about, which is about translation, could we say that this is a kind of narrative community as well, in that, you know, there are a large number of narratives about what translation is and what translators do, around which this community coalesces. And, you know, you've got the central tenets, but then you've also got, you know, different people will be debating, you know, what translation is. And so maybe these are narratives of translation. So could it also be at the broader level, a narrative community in that sense? That's a whole package of things all in one. You can answer whatever you like.
Wow, that reminds of our supervision meetings, Robert.
I did promise not to make this like a rerun of the Viva, but sorry if it felt like that.
No, it's fine. Yeah, I'll just that's absolutely excellent questions. I felt lucky that I had the book, the space to if I may put it, to experiment plugging and play COP theory with other theories. What really prompted me to bring in narrative, this concept of a narrative, was exactly that particular case. And also, as I mentioned, I draw a parallel of the development of online translation community in China and the online communities with the chronological development of the Chinese internet. So that was a case. We need to look at the time when the article was translated. It was in the early stages when the Chinese internet, according to Michelle Hawkes and David Harold, it was still a carnival and it was still a messy mixed space where it allows more creative expressions. And also, so back to your question, I found that it was really useful to firstly to analyze at a micro level of these conversations or debates between the commenters in the EN community from a social narrative perspective. In particular, we know that there are different variations, different strands of discussions of a narrative and narratology in social sciences and in arts and humanities. What I found particularly appropriate of Baker's model, or later Chuan Harding's model, was the how it is adaptable and also with the joint enterprise aspect of the COP theory, because we know that a joint enterprise is a set of negotiated collective goals and the purposes. So back to contextualize that in that particular time, that helps us to understand the identities of both individuals participating in online translation community, and also the identities and the characteristic, that particular aspect of the characteristic of online translation community. So I just turned to this page. I know you didn't intend to make it a Viva, but I find this quotes from Baker particularly useful. Is that it's on page 67 to 68 from the book. So I said myself that a combined approach to online collaborative translations and the platforms, like this combined approach is narrative community and communities of practice, will show us how communities are formed, how they grow and change, but nevertheless maintain their identity. So here, if we look at Tengci journalism projects, that is exactly where I bring in this framing of online collaborative translation as a social media, as a citizen media practice. So that's particular identity of online translation and also online translation communities. So that was initially the agenda of being a citizen media projects and the practice, that's identity, and how this community, they attract individuals, and how these ultimately disparate individuals come to share and identify with a set of broad narratives that can draw them together as a community. So when they bring in their individual enterprise prior to joining the community, and then how that is negotiated during the process of being a community member, and still accommodate endless variations at the individual level. So that's where I find narrative theory. So first of all, it was suitable to analyze that particular case. And then back to your question of whether EN can also be regarded as a narrative community, I wouldn't for the moment, because of its massive scale. And also, even when it comes to the discussion of professionalism, that's, as you mentioned, it's also a particular case, which is similar to this discussion of the different debates, different narratives on democracy as well. I hope that's answers.
That's yeah, that's good enough. Yeah, thanks very much. I'm going to bring in the two guests and then one more time, and then I think open it up and see if there are any questions from the floor. So whether you want to respond to that or whether you'd like to come in on another thing, Miguel.
Yeah, I mean, you brought the chapter on narratology, narrative theory, and I wanted to bring very quickly to here, since most of our educators, the chapter on situated learning, because I did have a chapter on competence and learning in my book, based on translation competence from a completely different approach, and I really enjoy the contribution in your book, Clara, bringing these communities of practice and how this has its own situated learning approach, and I really it really brings in a completely new perspective on why or how participants approach online collaborative translation to learn in this sense. You also indicate that we shouldn't have, like, I agree with it in page 107, it shouldn't be a false dichotomy between structural learning in class or non-structural learning. You also agree with me, actually, in page 154, you say that why not supplement with real life experience the online structural learning that happens in the classroom in this way. When I started writing on this, there was more, as any phenomenon that emerges, there was some sort of resistance by educators. Oh, their students are doing non-professional, like unsupervised learning. And I used to say in conferences, I remember, it was like, if I was a guitar instructor and my student have a punk rock band, and every weekend he spent 50 hours playing punk rock with a guitar, he has a guitar in his hands for like 50 more hours. And that was like what I used to say, like, 5-7 years ago about this topic. So I wanted for you to comment on this notion of, like, that you bring also in page 154 at the end, the differences in competence, that in communities of practice, competence is how others recognize each other, as opposed to practice theory by Olohan, in which competence is more closely to what I have written on the set of skills, how you acquire the skills. So how do you see EM and learning, like the yearning for learning? I would call it yearning for learning in these communities.
Thanks so much, Miguel. Of course, obviously I read your book before I wrote mine. And also I would like to thank the reviewer examiners of my PhD thesis who brought to my attention this discussion of classroom learning versus informal learning, as in online translation communities. So in the book, I simply draw on Leif and Wenger. There are 4 characteristics of the situated learning. One is informality. So as we can see over there, it's absolutely informal learning on online communities. And the other is situatedness, because every collaborative translation project has its own situations. And then co-participation, it's self-explanatory. And then the last characteristic is sustainability, which is related to the COPS dimension. So how this shared practice sustains the community, sense of community. I think in the future, there is space for development for collaborative translation and online collaborative translation to be brought into classroom learning more. I remember in one of your earlier talks, I think it was the one you gave at where was that? If you were talking about collaborative translation in the context of crisis translation, and you mentioned LIOT. So this also brings us to the issue of translation technologies, which is when I was listening to it and when I was reading chapter 6 again myself, and then I'm also teaching translation technologies here at BU and earlier at Monash. So how this kind of informal learning can be incorporating the classroom training of translators, and to draw on the expertise of the massive crowds who are professionals in various subject matters. And also we have semi-structured interview. Then how about this semi-structured online collaborative translation in classroom translator training as well, with the support of translation technologies and other ICTs, right?
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Clara.
Dinkun, do you want to have a final word before? You're okay. Do we have any questions? No, it's getting late, but we could probably take one or two. Yeah.
Thank you, professors, for the introduction and the discussion today. I'm a PhD student from Poly U, and you could call me Yan. Yeah, actually, I have read the book, and I really enjoy reading it as kind of an ethnographer's journey into the OCT community. Okay, yeah. My question is, Clara, you just mentioned the collaborative turn in this field. And then also Miguel has mentioned that with the development of AI, right now we have ChatGPT. So will this kind of technological turn kind of reverse this collaborative turn? Because you see, with the ChatGPT, sometimes it could translate like better than amateur translators in a more efficient way. So under this background, would this collaborative turn be reversed, or at least, as you mentioned, this massive scale of some online collaborative translating community, would it be like shrinked a little bit because those technologies could help do something of that? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Yan, for your question, and thanks for coming today. Yeah, so I think that's something that almost everyone is talking about, right? Collaborative term as one of the last slides. I don't think it's a matter of shrinking or disappearing. I think it's developing in a different in its own direction, how it develops organically. In fact, collaborative translation has become or translation overall, it's well, especially in the industry, it's the majority of the tasks for humans will be post editing, and in terms of, for example, EN, TED Talks, right? And many other online translation communities. And also what Dinkun mentioned about audiovisual translation fan subbing. It's an irreversible trend to bring in more and more technologies to have the machines done more work, where humans then come in and intervene. So I would say it's not a matter of shrinking or expanding, but developing or evolving with a different nature and in the form of human machine collaboration. So maybe, I don't know if Miguel has any comments on that.
Yes, I think, I've been working on the role of humans in this automation paradigm, and there will always be a role of humans for post-editing, monolingual ChatGPT, for post-editing, anything. And disruption, the work on disruption and translation, I would indicated that, like in any field, disruption happens at the low end of any activity. So any activity that is easily replaced, as somebody mentioned, that well, they will be replaced. Probably the very easy translations or something that is very not complicated might be taken up by AI or ChatGPT machine translation, but there will always be areas in which the professionals cannot cope with the demand. There will be interests that are not taken care of by the industry that fans will take up in whichever collaboration with technology might happen. So I think that there will always be areas in which humans will collaborate with machines and with others to translate, either because of the interest of the content, because of the urgency, or in collaboration with machines in different forms, but it will all continue, of course. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's take one more. Boyi online. Juan Boyi, do you want to come in?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi everyone. I just have this question just pop into my mind. I hope you don't mind. Clara, in the beginning, you probably introduced your map of the online collaborative translation and collaborative translation. So I was just thinking, and Yan from the floor just mentioned the collaborative turn and the technological turn translation study. So perhaps even Ireland, so where Michael Cronin is, there is this ecological turn. So from the ecological perspective, to look at collaborative translation, is it enough to just include humans and machine in your map? What about animals? What about other things in our ecology? It's just recently Shabnam from Edinburgh, who came to Dublin to give a talk on her study on the translation of whale sound and dolphin sound. So in that case, dolphins and whales, they are also authors, but they are not human. It's just like a comment. Would you perhaps in the future include also like animals in this map?
Thanks for your comments, Boyi. Well, I'm not sure how to respond to that. So of course, I think everything is possible. And yeah, we may consider, we have different, as I mentioned, there are different turns in translation studies. So I'm sure that this map will continue to evolve, and we may have different maps. So but thanks for your insights and sharing. I don't know if Dinkwon, do you have anything to add on that? The animal?
Actually, I do. It's also something, it's not something suddenly pop up in my mind, but it's been there for a while. Speaking of the ecological turn, I think one of the very important, also very useful paradigm that maybe in some way can expand Clara's already a very insightful and comprehensive map is post-humanism, which is also reflected in Michael Cronin's recent work. And if we really want to transpass that boundaries between species, and like Womboy just mentioned, maybe we need to think about how the communication between animals happen and how the humans are communicating with animals at present and in historical context. But also, since we are discussing online collaborative translation, and I think there is another post-human dimension for this ecological turns to think about how the online and physical world collaborative communities actually interact and compensate or intermediate with each other. One of the things that has been brought up is narrative communities. We can definitely look at how the narrative communities move between online and offline worlds and try to do activities such as the world building. And I think this things has already been happened. If you are interested, you can definitely go look at the Civic Imagination project. It's about how the online collaborative communities using popular culture elements to influence real world changes. Okay, it's just very random and comments that await for further justification and verification, maybe in your future work.
Great. Thank you very much. A couple of things have come in. One of them says, it's a bit hard for me to imagine animals on Clara's map, as animals may not intentionally collaborate. A very interesting comment nevertheless. Okay. Let's just take maybe one more from Yang Ha Hao. There are others, but I think this is all we've got time for. We're already over. She says, in your research, have you explored the motivations that drive professionals to translate in the EN community? What are the motivations for professionals that, I know you did have a UN translator in there, so maybe you can just finish up with that.
Thank you for your question, Hao, and congratulations, by the way, on your successful qualification exam. For motivations, yeah, one of the earlier issues that scholars studied in terms of online collaborative translation is exactly motivations. So I undertook interviews for professionals participating. If I recall, if my memory serves me correctly, they would like to share the knowledge. So this is what Maeve Olahan, this is similar to what Maeve Olahan and also in Julie McDonough-Domaya's work has they proposed the intrinsic and the extrinsic motivations. So these were really their pure altruism and with also the aim to share knowledge and to contribute to making the information that is not accessible to the users, the Chinese speaker users, to make that information available to them. So these are, I think, from my research, these are the motivations.
Great, thank you very much. I am going to wrap it up there because we're actually well over time. So let me thank you all very much indeed for coming. And I'd like particularly to thank our guests, Professor Jimenez Crispo, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And Dr. Wang Ying-kun, thank you very much as well. It was a really stimulating discussion. It could go on for another hour or so, I think, at least, but we'll have to have a separate conference to revisit some of these COP issues, I think. So with that, let me wrap it up. Thank you very much also to those online. And thanks for all the questions and so forth. And I look forward to seeing you at the next book launch.
On the 25th of April.
On the 25th of April. Perhaps I should encourage you all to go out and buy Clara's book as well. But anyway, great.
Just one note that there's a link in the comments. If I can please ask everyone to fill in a feedback form, everyone who's online. People in the room will get their feedback forms on email in tomorrow probably.
Okay.
Yes, and thank you again for joining us. This was the 6th book talk. We do plan to continue organizing these every 3 months. And the next one, as I said, will be on the 25th of April, and you will all receive an invitation for that one. Thank you.
Thank you very much.